So the Spyro Reignited Trilogy came out, and for the last 6 or so odd months, I have been on the edge of my seat waiting for this game, this remake of some of my all-time favorite games. And now I've played them, I've beat them, and I might have even platinum trophied every single one of them. So with all that in mind, what do I think about it? Well, let's jump into the good and the bad of this PS1 remake trilogy. So if you're here to know whether or not you should buy this game or not, the answer is unquestionably yes from me. If you're a fan of the series, especially of the old PS1 classics, you are doing yourself a great disservice not picking this up. But also if you're someone who has never played these games and has only ever heard of them, I'd say that this is a great way to be introduced to the series. Plus, at the price of $40 for 3 full-length games, you can't really lose. Now, what I'm gonna do is break down graphics, design, characters, music, gameplay, and finally patch notes all one by one. I'm gonna go over each topic and tell you the good and the bad of each based on my opinion. There's nothing objective here, this is all just my own personal thoughts, as a fan. Though, the patch notes section is a different story, but we'll get to that a little later. So with all that in mind, let's jump into the graphics and see how this PS1 trilogy translates into the modern technology. So if you're like me and have played the original trilogy a million times over, then this remake has some truly breathtaking moments and shots, especially when you're first entering levels. The worlds of the Dragon Kingdoms of Spyro 1, Avalar of Spyro 2, and their Forgotten Realms of Spyro 3 are all colorful and varied, with a clear cartoon style and bounce to everything from the vast assortments of villains you'll come across to the NPCs and dragons you'll be saving, to the various fodder that you'll be flaming for health. Everything in this trilogy feels connected and cohesive within the context of this beautiful painting slash watercolor aesthetic that this game is going for. Up close things are detailed and beautiful to take in, and from far away they get ever blotchier, like the strokes of a paintbrush growing more and more broad as you walk away from it. For me, this was the perfect way to capture the surreal, dreamlike beauty and imagination that the original trilogy is known and loved for. Night levels shade everything in dramatic swaths of blue and greens, highlighted by bright splotches of orange, like in that of Dark Hollow, while sunsets radiate deep reds and oranges that cascade across levels, creating an atmosphere in a fashion that the PS1's technology could only dream of. This might seem a bit of a cop-out starting off, but personally, I don't find anything bad with the graphics as they are now. I love what Toys for Bob and Sansuaro Games, incidentally, have done purely just based on graphics alone. My one issue might be that with all these beautiful visuals comes an issue of optimization, which we will go into much more detail with in the patch notes section. But for now, graphics really are only half the story of the visuals. Let's talk about those designs. The level designs across the board are not only faithful to the spirit of the originals, but are also brimming with details that add insurmountable character and magic to these old places, like moving into an old vintage home and adding to the detail rather than taking away from its classic charms. I'll fully admit that for years I have been thinking about what a remade Spyro Trilogy would look like, way before even Crash Insane Trilogy was announced. Me and my brother would go on for hour-long conversations conversations about what we imagine Spyro would be like in today's graphics, which only makes playing through the trilogy all the more fascinating and emotionally gratifying. Little details like Dark Hollow now being a library and hub for dragon writers, with shelves of books and dim lamplights, further making me want to live in this little spot of atmosphere. Or how about the specks of atmosphere that look like cherry blossom petals in Dark Passage? Or how every world in Avalar now reflect their place in the kingdom, like Colossus acting as both a monk temple and the place where all the Avalar inhabitants come to watch hockey. Details like these build upon the already brilliant bits of world building that could be found in the original and pushes them to the forefront. I could go on and on with stuff like this, but suffice it to say, I think the level design and design philosophy that went into rebuilding these magical worlds is simple and exactly hits right on the mark. As for the character designs, I would say that they have been far more controversial, with many sharing their dislike of some of the NPCs, enemies, and even the waistlines, as it were. But how do I feel? Overall, while I would say that the style can be a bit different and even jarringly so from the original trilogy at times, I can also confidently say that the new art style is consistent and fits well, at least within the context of this remake. Of course, you all have the redesigned dragons, which all look fantastic. Like seriously, someone was having way too much fun designing these guys, especially since some of them get less than 3 seconds of on-screen time. The amount of love put into those characters that appear for only a few seconds shows a real care for the details and the character of these games. I enjoy how each dragon each fit their homeworld perfectly. I mean, they sort of did back in the original, but now the artisans are all painters, bakers, writers, musicians. The peacekeepers all wear armor and sport weapons. The dreamweavers look like something out of, well, a dream. I also like how in the first cutscene in Spyro the Dragon actually shows Nasty Nork watching TV. I always joked about that, and it's small changes like these, as well as Nasty's room being full of what is either love letters or something he sent for himself, or the inspirational posters on his walls. Things like these add so many cool layers that, for a fan like me, I just really appreciate and enjoy. If there's one thing that I could tell you that is leaps and bounds better than the originals, it is the general animation and emotion that all the characters can express with today's technology. The cartoony style that this game fully embraces makes watching cutscenes a real delight. The original games always had a cartoony style to begin with, and so having the technology to add some bounce and fluidity to the character models is again something the PS1 technology could only dream of doing this well. This isn't quite a good or a bad, but it's an honest feeling that I had from start to finish while playing through the trilogy. Sometimes I wish that they would go off script a bit more with the cutscenes, and especially with the dragons. It's almost testament to how well made everything is and looks, but at the same time, I couldn't help but feel they were held back a little bit. Like they were trying to push as much personality as they could into these cutscenes and into the dragons and interactions, but had limits for how far they could push them. I personally would have loved some additional cutscenes or extended scenes once in a while, like maybe seeing Nasty's perspective once or twice on your way to flaming him, perhaps between the travel of worlds, or a cutscene when you first meet him, or a cutscene in Spyro Year the Dragon where Spyro interacts with the sorceress at least one time. Would anyone have complained if a bit more new was added to the game? If some of the "thank you for releasing me" dragons had some cool new dialogue? Don't get the wrong impression, these are sort of non-complaints in a way, because I'm asking for things that were never there to begin with, in a game that's trying to emulate 3 games as perfectly as possible. But I can't help but feel like it's missed potential. Some may dislike some of the new changes to character designs on an purely aesthetic level, like the Nork sporting a much more ugly and grizzled lurk, or Allura looking much more like a fawn rather than a half-human, half-goat fox thing, or some of the characters that look totally different. This is subjective for everyone, but for me, I generally like the new styles. There were a few I had a faint moment of, huh, well, that doesn't look how I imagined. But I then usually came to either enjoy the new design, or at the very least, if I didn't like it, it didn't bother me too much personally. Something I do want to point out though is admittingly, some of the old PS1 models look, well, simple. And that's to be expected of a game so old. But to some degree, I feel like people need to understand that there's a lot of room for interpretation here when you're working with these flat textured characters that sometimes look like blobs with eyeballs. That is part of their charm, of course, but it doesn't mean that it would translate well in today's graphics. That's why I personally don't have issue with any of these changes. On that note, I think people are overreacting the shield design. If you don't like it, fine, but I find nothing about it offensive, and before you go and preach to me how unrealistic her waist is, I'm gonna stop you right here and say that I don't really give a shit personally, and I don't care that they made her look more like a girl either. If you do, I'm sorry, but I don't. So, guns are apparently a no-no in this game, at least in some cases. See, one of the most famous levels in the first Spyro the Dragon is the final level before you take on Nasty Nork, Twilight Harbor, in which you have these Nork commandos come out with assault rifles, ready to take your purple ass out. In my retrospective, I talked about how cool I always thought this was, the way it juxtaposes the magical worlds you've been up until now. Nasty's world brings it all back down to this dirty reality, and plus, it's always just really funny to think that Nasty was tired of playing games and just decided to try and shoot you. But in the Reignited Trilogy, they changed the gun-toting Nork commandos into goo gun splatoon type commandos. Now, given the whole theme of Nasty's world has been changed in the remake to one of producing this toxic goo, Toys for Bob claim that this was a creative choice and not one of censorship, which I'm sort of 50-50 on. See, on the other hand, you have Dino Mines where cowboy T-Rexes are shooting pistols and such, or the Peacekeeper realms where they use blunderbuss weapons, but then you have Scorch of Ripto's Rage, in which these fellows who used to be sporting rifles now have these weird slingshot things. Or in the same level from before in Dino Mines, the same level where dinos are shooting up with pistols, you have the Gatling gun Triceratops, now shooting sausages instead of bullets, which makes me think specifically rifles, assault rifles, and anything fully automatic in general were taken out of the game, which is a real crying shame, as it takes away from those levels and robs many of them of their identity. Now, do these changes take away from the whole experience of the game, what it has to offer? No. But do I hate censorship? Yes. So I figured that I at least point them out, as one of the things that I do personally take issue with. Also, on a completely unrelated note, whose bright idea was it to make the whale in Evening Lake look like this? So by characters, since I already went over their designs, I'm simply talking about the characters' voices, personalities, etc. Overall, I would say that all the characters feel not only faithful to the originals, but a lot better too. I think that's mainly due to them being able to express their feelings a lot better through just the animations. It adds an extra layer of fun to them all, like Hunter's cowardice and bumbling nature coming across just through his body movements. performance, or the hints of genuine personality all the released dragons give you. I also love how Spyro is much more consistent of a character through the whole trilogy, with his confident, cocky, yet laid back and sometimes sarcastic nature, as well as heroic nature I suppose, coming across perfectly. I also adore how Laura flirts with Spyro, something she sort of always did in the originals, but again, comes across much clearer here and is so much more cuter. Oh, and what about Moneybags, who I swear they managed to make even more of a pompous, greedy asshole in this trilogy. I actually don't have a lot of bad to say here. The voice work is well done, outside of a few odd voice changes from some of the NPCs, which admittingly takes away from their charm, though the main cast was at least done quite well, at least to me. Now for the music, I'm not gonna break it down into the good and the bad, cause honestly, it's one of the most subjective mediums there is. And also, even though all the music has been remastered and remixed, if you don't like any of the new remixes, you can always turn on the original music. So I kind of feel like everybody wins here. With that being said, how is the new music? It's pretty good. Now that being said, most of the new music sounds fairly similar to the original, with most of the tracks having the same feel, just with slight instrumentation changes. Perhaps some songs now go for a softer tone, others have a much more grand feel. If I were to describe the remastered soundtrack in one word, I would call it nostalgic. It feels like the overall tone the remastered music is trying to evoke is nostalgia, playing the music how one might picture in their mind when looking back at these games fondly from their childhood, rather than how the music really was, if that makes sense. I chose to listen to it over the original soundtrack most of the time to try to get a good feel for the atmosphere that this trilogy was trying to evoke with it. And overall, I would gladly play the trilogy over again with either version of the soundtrack, with maybe a few exceptions like that of Magma Comb, in which they couldn't find the chanting, and instead had to try and imitate it. All I can imagine when I hear that is someone making a general chanting noise with their mouth, and then they slowed it down, and it's very distracting. It almost makes me cringe, to be honest. So, with this level, I obviously turned the original music back on. Besides that, I'd say the only real complaint with the new soundtrack as a whole is some of the tracks, while enjoyable, don't have quite the same kick, or percussion, or beat as the original soundtrack, and I think it's testament to just how perfect the original soundtrack was, that because in their pursuit to change every track just a bit, I can't say any are better than the original tracks. Just either as good or slightly less so. But at the same time, I think it was always unfair to expect so much from the soundtrack since the originals have aged so well. But overall, I'd say they're worthy a playthrough with a listen for sure. And if nothing else, the novelty of hearing some official remastered and remixed versions of these tracks I've listened to 100 times over was at least interesting, to say the least. Hey, did you like the original 3 Spyro games? Congrats! You'll like this too. The end. Okay, but being more serious, I want to try and be brief, but the one point I'll gladly get across is, Spyro the Dragon has never felt better to play. I will say that the thing that made me want to keep playing this trilogy late into the night went further than just nostalgia and new visuals. The gameplay is addicting as ever, and in many ways more so than the original trilogy. Everything from the weight of your jumps, the haptic feedback of grabbing gems, breaking boxes, and charging through enemies. It all feels buttery smooth and bouncy. If you have no real investment in the nostalgia factor of this remake, the gameplay will at least sell you, because it follows the primary design philosophy that every good 3D platformer should have. Make it feel good to platform. I love how enemies get tossed backward by your flame or your charge, or the way the music picks up a slight percussion when you're charging about. It all encourages you to kill those little fuckers and collect all the gems and find every nook and cranny and secret that you can. I've always felt that Spyro was, and almost always has been, a fun character to control, even in some of his worst games. Something about his 4 legs on the ground gives him a sort of unique feel over most 2-legged platformer dudes that's hard to put into exact words. The 4 extra characters in Year of the Dragon have also been improved tenfold. I never had any issue with them in the original trilogy, as I stated in my retrospective before, but there's no getting around that they just feel so much more cohesive and so much more fun to play as. Sergeant Byrne and Agent 9 in particular, with the latter sporting a full Ratchet and Clank-like gameplay style, and Sergeant Bird's missiles, now with their ability to lock onto targets, makes his levels exponentially more fun. Something else of note is I also noticed the AI of enemies felt a bit sharper, or at least quicker, with many smacking you a bit quicker and being much more aggressive in general than they were in the originals, which I found to be a welcoming and even challenging change in key moments. So, let's talk about that skateboard. Skateboarding was one of my favorite minigames from the original trilogy, and I remember I used to play for hours on it when I was younger. It even got me into the Tony Hawk Pro Skater games for a while. So needless to say, muscle memory is very much a thing for me. While the actual controls aren't really different from the originals to this, the feel is quite different. Not bad, but just off. Some of that might be muscle memory that's messing with me, although I will say the physics are just objectively broken and really need fixing in this game. It feels like an overactive and buggy aim assist. I'd also like to say the speedways are a bit weird. They feel much more difficult, and I think a large part of why is how hard it is to turn and pull Spyro around. I did eventually get used to it, inverted controls and all, but these did give me some trouble, and I never had any trouble with these in the originals. Besides that, there is a new hover mechanic that makes you have to glide for a certain amount of time for your hover to work, otherwise you just plummet. It also seems to happen if you're too close to an edge, it won't hover and you'll just plummet, which is very annoying to say the least. In my playthrough, all the normal jumps and glides, I never had too much issue with, but when I tried taking shortcuts or just messed about, I noticed it a lot more, and I wish you had the option to toggle it on or off, because it honestly did nothing but make me nervous during certain glides that it would randomly just not fucking work. So there's no good or bad here, but one unfortunate reality, and that is I'm pretty sure that this game needed another month in development, because it's really not well optimized and there are some general issues with it. So let me just list off the problems that should be easy to patch and fix over time, hopefully in the near future. This is the part of my video that may age badly if they fix these following issues, but for the time being, you should know what you're getting, and also for the time being, God knows I didn't rush this video out, and these problems are still prevalent as of my writing and recording this. So let's get into it. While this issue differs a lot from person to person, the game does have some frame rate issues on occasion. It seems to happen less when you're running it on a PS4 Pro by my experience, though it was never really distracting at all for me, except for one occasion when I was playing the game on a normal PS4 on the level Lost Fleet. The game just started fucking chugging all of a sudden, and it was just completely unplayable till I exited the level and then went back in, which annoyed me to no end since this is really one of the few levels that I really don't like. Which actually leads me to... So when I say rushed, I don't mean unplayable, and I don't mean bad, I mean it feels less polished in comparison to the first two games. This can be seen through the frame rate issues, and which it seems to have the worst of, as well as having the least brand new stuff from the remake. If you don't know by now, Sanzoru Games was commissioned to help finish the third game in time for release, which is a very bad sign. I have no idea what exactly happened here, but back when this game was delayed 2 months, many thought that it was due to the controversy of the games not all being on the disc, with only the first game being on the disc. And while that might have been a factor, it seems quite realistic that this game needed more time than it was given, and being that Activision's the publisher, it's no surprise that it was rushed out anyway. In fact, we're lucky that it had 2 extra months, because God knows what would have happened if it was actually released back in September. There's also smaller little issues in the third game, like dragon eggs being kind of copy and pasted when you compare them to the amount of intricate detail that was put into the first game's dragons that you release. I know this is a little bit more nitpicky, but I figure I'd point it out anyway because admittingly it was a little bit jarring, the quality difference that's here. It's also the entry that seems to have the most glitches, which leads me to... This game has some real bad glitches, and not the fun kind like in the original trilogy, though there are a few like that here and there, more like the "oh shit, I can't finish the game now" glitches. My brother actually ran into a massive bug in the first game, in which Nasty's loot, the final level in the game after you 100% everything, just never fucking opens, forcing you to have to replay the whole game again to open it up, and robbing you of the platinum trophy for the time being as well. I never ran into this glitch personally, but shit like this needs to be fixed ASAP. There are other minor glitches like certain minigames or challenges bugging out and whatnot, and while these are easy to get working again by simply restarting them, it can be frustrating all the same, and again, needs to be fixed soon. If I were to put my money anywhere, this seems to be an issue that needs to be addressed first, because while I never had any issues with the motion blur personally, and generally I don't in games anyway, I know a lot of people did, with some saying it made them feel sick to their stomach moving the camera. Again, this is very subjective, and it could also be some people way overreacting with some of this. Having the option to turn it on or off, like they did if Uncharted 4 for example, would be great, and I assume would be an easy addition, hopefully. Those are the important issues that need to be addressed, alongside maybe subtitles. Ask for random shit like stuff I think would be cool if they added for the game for free or via DLC. I think a hard mode would be really cool, a sort of new game plus. I just love shit like that. Creating new DLC levels or even new worlds akin to how Crash Insane Trilogy added new levels would also be really cool as well. Matter of fact, I think it would be even cooler if they added far more than how Crash Insane Trilogy did it, with possibly new story-related levels. Something of a taste for what a new Spyro game might be when they have full creative freedom. But they should probably fix the major issues with the game first before they jump into the new stuff. So this video was way longer than I thought it was going to be. But if you stuck around for this long, then you probably got the impression that that's because I have a lot to say about this game. The original Spyro the Dragon trilogy is such an important piece of my childhood, And these are the types of games that I'll be playing for the rest of my life because they inspire me so much. They're important to me in more ways than one. I mean, hell, I did a 2-hour retrospective on the original trilogy before, and I want to say though that despite me pointing out the flaws of this remake, I overall really enjoyed it. If I was talking purely from emotions, then I would just tell you to go buy it and experience this awesome trilogy. But it's because I love it so much that I want it to be the best it can be. So when I talk about the bad, mainly the issues that have to do with glitches and really the more objective issues in the patch notes, it's because I want them to be fixed, because I want this to be perfect, at least as much as it can be. The one takeaway from all this is that it may not be surprising to me, but perhaps to others, is that the original Spyro the Dragon trilogy in gameplay has really aged well. The gameplay and the core design and idea of the trilogy is still extremely fun all these years later. Overall, if you're a fan of Spyro, whether you hearken from the original trilogy or the Legend of Spyro games, or God forbid the Skylander ones, I'd say come pick this game up and try it out. And if you're completely new to this series and know literally nothing about it, still pick it up, because this remake is both a love letter to the fans and an open invitation for all the new fans to come. So until next time, this has been Dylan the Night Owl, flying off.
「